Coming up on Arirang News. The Finance Ministry says for a second month in a row, the South Korean economy is seeing signs of gradual recovery, led by production, exports, and jobs. But uncertainties still remain amid unstable supply chains. There is a possibility of North Korea launching an intercontinental ballistic missile sometime this month. This is what a senior South Korean presidential official says on his way to discuss nuclear and strategic planning issues between Seoul and Washington. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, addressing the press in Israel after meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, says that it is not right nor reasonable for Israel to reoccupy Gaza. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with signs of recovery in the South Korean economy. For a second straight month, it's gradually moving away from a slowdown on the back of rebound in manufacturing production, chip exports, and solid job figures. Our Park Gun-woo leads us off.
South Korea's economic slowdown is continuing to ease, according to the Finance Ministry's monthly Economic Green Book released on Friday. The ministry said the economic slowdown is gradually easing due to recovery in production and manufacturing industry exports, including semiconductors. In contrast, the report highlighted a drop in retail sales in October, as well as low economic sentiment over the previous months, while the composite consumer sentiment index for November dropped 0.9 points on month. The ministry said it would need to come up with solutions to narrow these discrepancies. At a briefing on Friday, a finance ministry official also cited global uncertainties, including geopolitical risks from ongoing wars and unstable supply chains that could hinder economic recovery, adding the government would strengthen efforts toward economic recovery despite the uncertainties.
The government will focus on stabilizing people's livelihoods, including consumer prices, and further strengthen efforts so that the export recovery expands to the whole economy.
Meanwhile, total exports in November came to $55.8 billion, an increase of 7.8% on year. By item, 12 out of 15 major export items, including ships, vehicles, and chips, saw an increase. And exports to 6 out of 9 main regions, including the US, Japan, and India, saw a jump as well. In terms of employment in November, 277,000 jobs were added on year, a smaller increase than the month before due to the base effect caused by eased COVID-19 measures. Though unemployment increased by 11,000, the unemployment rate was the same as last year at 2.3%. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
Staying on the economic front, the Asian Development Bank remains cautiously optimistic about Asia's economic prospects in 2024, but acknowledges the presence of tangible risk factors. Our business correspondent Moon Hae-ryun sat down with the bank's top economists to discuss what lies ahead.
Amid external conflict and unusual weather posing challenges this year, Asia's economic outlook going into 2024 remains solid. The Asian Development Bank's December report on Wednesday showed the region's growth has been upbeat on the back of strong domestic demand and the recovery in the tourism sector. However, the agency's chief economist, Albert Park, discussed how certain trends are affecting the region's economies.
So, unfortunately, we live in a world where there's been a lot of geopolitical kind of tensions, and we've had sanction regimes, trade wars, and other industrial policies that are kind of erecting barriers to free trade. And we think that's not healthy for the region because Asia in particular historically has really benefited a lot from open trade and export-led growth.
As well as geopolitical tensions, other factors such as unusual weather and slowing global demand in certain industries have raised concerns about supply chains. South Korea has experienced food security challenges as a result of the heat wave which swept through the country this summer. And recent disruptions in urea exports from China have highlighted a need to reduce dependence on a single source of key materials.
We hope that countries can think together about how to make, number one, make agriculture more resilient to supply shocks, but then also think ahead and come up with plans where countries do not overly restrict their trade when there is a negative shock, because that really hurts the most vulnerable countries, and to think about instead protecting consumers through more targeted policy measures.
Despite these headwinds, the ADB revised its 2023 growth estimate for Asia, raising it by 0.2 percentage points from its earlier forecast in September. Its projection for South Korea remained unchanged, but the country's main export sector could be seeing a recovery.
Well, we're cautiously optimistic. Not just Korea, but the global semiconductor market has kind of bottomed out earlier this year, and we're seeing a recovery in global demand. The U.S. economy is growing a bit faster, than we had expected earlier, which helps.
With the Fed's decision to keep interest rates steady for the third consecutive month on Thursday, it's predicted to lower rates in 2024, which is welcome news for the region.
I think the lower interest rates are better for the region because high interest rates really put financial pressure. It raises the cost of capital and investment. It leads to kind of capital flowing out of the region and gives pressure on countries to raise their interest rates in response to the higher U.S. Fed rate.
With these economic trends expected to continue, governments will have to form policies targeted at sustainable growth. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Moving on, President Yoon Suk-yeol, as he welcomed International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, predicted that there'll be more female CEOs in South Korea soon, noting that the country is actively supporting women's economic activities. He made the remarks at a meeting on Friday evening as Georgieva is in Seoul for a conference jointly hosted by the South Korean government and the IMF on digital money called Navigating a Changing Financial Landscape. President Yoon showed his appreciation for the managing director's participation in other activities while in Seoul and said he hopes she understands the nation's economy better. Georgieva praised Korea's private sector-focused economic management and efforts to maintain physical health in line with IMF policy recommendations. President Yoon Suk-yeol came home from his state visit to the Netherlands, where he forged a semiconductor alliance with the country, as well as increasing the scope of bilateral cooperation. Our Oh Soo-young wraps up his visit and highlights the deeper significance of the outcomes.
South Korea's new semiconductor alliance with the Netherlands signifies Seoul's broadening cooperation with like-minded countries as a trusted economic and security partner. That's according to diplomatic experts following President Yoon Suk-yeol's trip to the European country this week. His number one priority was securing South Korea's position in the global supply chain for semiconductors, the country's biggest export item. Thus, he formed a chip alliance with the Netherlands, as well as new dialogue channels to stabilize supply chains of critical technologies, and oversaw megadeals made between Korean chip makers Samsung and SK Hynix and Dutch chip equipment company ASML.
So microchips are the very foundation of our high-tech and increasingly digitalized world. And the Netherlands and South Korea, as advanced economies, are extremely dependent on these chips. But recent developments have shown that the semiconductor supply chain is susceptible to disruptions as a result of different bottlenecks that exist through this chain. And our countries have recognized this problem and decided to act.
The two sides also forged agreements to collaborate in green energy, artificial intelligence, quantum tech, smart agriculture, and neuroscience. This could broaden the base for South Korea to forge closer trade ties with other European markets, particularly with its plans to establish its first cold chain logistics center in Rotterdam. In taking their partnership forward, Yoon highlighted South Korea and the Netherlands' common values such as freedom and the rule of law in stabilizing trade, supply chains, and other multilateral frameworks.
So we are not major powers, and even in our own neighborhoods, there are bigger fish around us. Yet we are open economies, and for our security, we rely on our partners, on our allies, and on the rules of international law. So in other words, we depend on our international environment. but we can also influence it. We can be global pivotal states, especially if we work together and we play to our shared strengths, which I think are very similar.
Alongside economic interests, there are also security aspects of the partnership. Yoon said with the Netherlands being a core member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, stronger Korean-Dutch defense ties could help Seoul work more closely with NATO as a cooperative partner. He noted that Seoul is now part of the bloc's intel sharing system, which experts say could provide crucial insights, such as into North Korea's illegal activities and cyber attacks. South Korea and the Netherlands penned a deal on strengthening defense cooperation, with Seoul to observe Europe's largest air and missile defense exercise in 2025. They also pledged further efforts to advance global norms on the military use of AI and will host the second Re-AIM conference next year. Following Yoon's Netherlands visit, Seoul says it will aim to bolster its network of like-minded partners as it looks to become a global pivotal state. Oseong, Arirang News.
North Korea could possibly launch an ICBM sometime this month. That's according to a South Korean senior official. Amid escalating threats, Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo could start sharing a missile warning system in real time before the end of the year. Our Peunji reports.
A senior presidential official has said there is a possibility that North Korea could launch an intercontinental ballistic missile this month. The first deputy chief of the National Security Office, Kim Tae-yo, said this as he arrived in Washington, D.C. for a high-profile meeting. He did not elaborate on what intelligence led him to believe so, or if related information has been shared with the U.S., but added that a ballistic missile launch using ICBM technology is a subject of extended deterrence discussions between Seoul and Washington. He also noted that regardless of the range of the ballistic missile, if a nuclear weapon is loaded onto it, it is a nuclear threat and an attack against South Korea. Kim is scheduled to take part in the second meeting of the Nuclear Consultative Group, a security meeting designed to discuss nuclear and strategic planning issues between Seoul and Washington. In the meantime, South Korea, the U.S., and Japan plan to start sharing data on North Korean missiles in real time. The Pentagon spokesperson said in a briefing on Thursday local time that the three countries are working together to operationalize the system by the end of 2023.
That we are hard at work on delivering on those agreements. We are on schedule to deliver by the end of this year.
His remarks come a day after the White House National Security Council Senior Director for East Asia and Oceania, Mira Rapp-Hooper, said the data sharing system is expected to become operational within the next few days. Earlier in August, the leaders of the three countries agreed to step up efforts to counter evolving North Korean nuclear missile threats. Peunji, Arirang News.
Moving on to the war between Israel and Hamas. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said today that the U.S. doesn't believe it's right for Israel to reoccupy Gaza over the long term. This comes after Sullivan's meeting with Israeli officials the day before to pressure Israel to lower the intensity of its military campaign in Gaza, to which the Israeli Prime Minister said his country will continue the fighting until complete victory. Our Kim Jung-sil has the latest.
U.S. President Joe Biden's security advisor Jake Sullivan gave details on Friday of his meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet in Tel Aviv the day before. The U.S. National Security Advisor said the U.S. agrees with Israel that the fight against Hamas is going to take months. But he added that the Israeli government has indicated that it doesn't have a long-term plan to occupy Gaza and that ultimately the control of Gaza has to transition to the Palestinians.
Now, the question of how that transition occurs, over what timetable, we are having intensive discussions about. But the U.S. position on this is clear. We do not believe that it makes sense for Israel or is right for Israel to occupy Gaza, reoccupy Gaza over the long term.
Sullivan's visit came just days after Biden said at a fundraiser that Israel was losing international support because of what he called its indiscriminate bombing. But after Thursday's meeting, the Israeli Prime Minister hadn't changed his stance.
We are more determined than ever to continue fighting until Hamas is eliminated, until complete victory.
The U.S. National Security Advisor added that he plans to meet with President of the Palestinian National Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, in Ramallah later on Friday to discuss ongoing efforts to promote stability in the West Bank, to revamp and revitalize the Palestinian Authority. Meanwhile, the total death toll in Gaza has now surpassed 18,700 since the war began on October 7th, according to Palestinian health officials. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
European Union member states reached a tentative agreement on the group's 12th package of sanctions against Russia in support of Ukraine. Following the 27 member countries' agreement on Thursday, including Austria, which held back until the last minute, the measure to ban the import of Russian diamonds will take effect on January 1st. The sanctions include a phased ban on diamond imports from third countries starting in March, in alignment with G7 nations, and better enforcement of an oil price cap. This follows a previous agreement by the European Union to start membership talks with Ukraine. Now, here in South Korea, more and more young people seem to think that marriage is no longer a must, especially women in their 20s. That's according to the latest social trends survey, coming at a time when the nation is facing a demographic challenge. Our economics correspondent Lee Soo-jin tells us more.
Young people in South Korea are losing interest in getting married. According to a report released Friday by Statistics Korea on societal trends, the number of people in their 20s and 30s who either believe that marriage is necessary or think that it's better to get married has been steadily declining since 2008. And more young women than men were found to have a more negative view about getting married. The proportion of women in their 20s who answered that marriage was necessary came to 27.5% in 2022. A sharp drop from the more than 50% who thought so in 2008, while the number for those in their 30s plunged to 31.8% from also more than 50%. Over the same period, the share of men in their 20s that believed that marriage was essential plunged from almost 72% to 41.9%, and for those in their 30s from nearly 70% to 48.7%. This means that only around 3 out of 10 women in their 20s and around 4 out of 10 men in their 20s believed marriage was necessary. Financial issues, namely not having enough money for a wedding and a place to live, were the #1 reason across all age groups for not getting married. And this answer was the most prevalent among those in their 20s and 30s. This is largely in line with why, for the first time, the annual median income of households with people in their 60s surpassed that of those in their 20s in 2021. Annual median income in 2021 compared to 2018 also fell by 7.4% for those in their 20s, but surged 22.5% for those aged 60 and above. People in their 20s were the only age group that saw a decline in income in 2021 compared to 4 years ago. The report is the latest in a series of gloomy demographic-related data released by the Statistics Agency. Earlier this week, it said that South Korea's population is expected to plummet to around 36 million by 2072 from the current 51.6 million. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Also on the local front, starting today, that is December 15th, a greater number of people living in Korea's remote regions are eligible for telemedicine services. Our Yoon explains.
In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, telemedicine services were first initiated in South Korea in 2020. And starting Friday, the contactless healthcare service will be expanded as part of the government's efforts to address gaps in medical care services. Telemedicine services have already been available for people residing in remote areas like islands and mountainous and isolated areas at night and on holidays. But now the services will be extended to 98 additional cities, counties, and districts identified as medically vulnerable areas starting December 15th. These are areas where the percentage of residents unable to reach a regional emergency medical center within 30 minutes exceeds 30%. The Health Ministry has also expanded the age group of people allowed to receive prescriptions using the telemedicine services. Those aged under 18 were only allowed contactless counseling services after 6 p.m. and on holidays. But now the service will be available to all age groups, including prescriptions. Contactless healthcare has also been expanded nationwide to allow returning patients to receive telemedicine treatment for general illnesses if they have any previous medical treatment records at the same hospital in the previous 6 months. For returning patients with specific or chronic diseases, they need to have treatment records for that disease at the same hospital in the previous 30 days. Previously, the services had only been available for returning patients with diseases like diabetes or hyperphagia. Morning after pills are prohibited from the prescription list. Lee Jung-hoo, Arirang News.
In sports, Kiwoom Heroes center fielder Lee Jung-hoo has signed a 6-year Major League Baseball contract worth $113 million with the San Francisco Giants. The deal is the largest for a South Korean player moving to the MLB through posting, surpassing the 6-year, $36 million deal that pitcher Ryu Hyun-jin signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers in late 2012. The contract includes an opt-out clause after the 2027 season, allowing the now 25-year-old to become a free agent. The son of KBO legend Lee Jong-bum, the junior Lee was named the league's most valuable player in 2022. Next Tuesday marks exactly 1 month until the 2024 Winter Youth Olympics kicks off in Gangwon province here. With the last-minute preparations underway, our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin provides us a closer look into the Youth Olympics and specifically Gangwon 2024.
Chang Yu-bin and Lee So-won have just finished their final exams, but they have no time to spare. The two high school curlers are representing Korea at the upcoming Winter Youth Olympic Games Gangwon 2024.
I first got to know curling through the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, and since then, it's really taken off thanks to Team Kim. We also hope we can spread curling to the world this time.
Around 1,900 athletes will take part in the 4th Winter Youth Olympic Games, which is being held in Asia for the first time. While it may not match the grand scale of the regular Olympics, the Youth Olympic Games is fueled by a broader vision. It's not just about the medals.
Gangwon 2024's official slogan is Grow Together. We hope participants can learn the Olympic values, collaborate and harmonise with each other. Beyond the races, we aim to provide education programs and events so that they can explore other cultures.
For some, the Games marks their first step onto the international stage. But whether you're competing or not, everyone is part of something bigger.
Even though it's my first international competition, considering my experience and practice at the Pyeongchang Sliding Center, I'm confident I'll race well.
Being a forerunner for the Olympics, my dream stage is an honor in itself.
More than 340 Winter Youth Olympic Games athletes have become Olympians, winning over 60 medals. And Gangwon 2024 is set to add another chapter to this rich legacy, with competitions at venues used during the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. Young athletes will have the chance to follow in the footsteps of their Olympic heroes.
When hosting the Olympics, the most significant investments tend to revolve around infrastructure, primarily the sports facilities, and then social infrastructure, such as accommodation facilities.
In 2018, it was about fostering connections through a shared passion. 6 years later, it's about the next generation growing together so they can shine forever. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
The winter rain that has been falling for 2 days in a row has been replaced by a freezing cold wave. The morning temperature in Seoul will drop to -3 degrees Celsius tomorrow. On Sunday, it will plummet to -11 degrees, the lowest temperature this winter. With a cold wind, the wind chill on Saturday is expected to make it feel like -10. A cold wave warning will be issued nationwide tomorrow as the Arctic cold wave moves south. Meanwhile, rain will turn into snow in Seoul and other parts of the country in the sub-zero cold. There will be heavy snow on the west coast and Jeju Island. Please pay attention to safety to avoid any accidents. Tomorrow morning in Seoul will start off at -3 degrees. Daytime highs will stay at -3 in Seoul. Gwangju will reach 2 degrees, Busan 7 degrees Celsius. We need to prepare for major temperature changes ahead. The extreme cold of around -10 degrees Celsius is expected to continue until next week. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that brings an end to this edition of Newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 10 p.m. with the AI Headline News. Hope everyone has a great weekend and a good night.